Hey everyone, we're going to be starting our notes for the first three signposts in this lecture. Remember to make sure you have a notebook and pen or pencil available. Make sure you take appropriate notes, and remember to stop recording when you need extra time. This is a video, and you can do whatever you want with that video. Okay, so you don't have to set up your notes this way, but I recommend something of this nature. I'm going to tell you what we're going to be seeing in each signpost. For every signpost, I'm going to give you the signpost. I'm going to give you the definition of the signpost. I'm going to give you some examples from stories we've already read. And then I'm going to give you the question that follows and why we asked the question. You pretty much need to know all five of these, at least the signpost, the definition, the question that follows, and why we asked the question, because those will at least help you. The example is really just to illustrate that we've seen these before. So I recommend something of this nature to help you set up your notes however you'd like. I'm not going to be looking at the notes, but you will be expected to recall this information, and you might as well have the notes to do it. Okay. So signpost number one is contrasts and contradictions. Contrasts and contradictions. This is when we observe a sharp contrast between what we would expect and what we observe the character doing. Essentially, when the character does, says, or thinks something different than what should we expect. This behavior contradicts either previous behaviors or well-established patterns, i.e. what we expect of people in general. If a character does something weird because we don't expect that character to do it, that's something notable. If we see the character do something weird or out of character because we don't expect people in general to do it, that's also notable. These we always want to notice when we read, and when we notice them, we want to be able to um, have a specific question ready to help us analyze and interpret what's going on. So some major examples that we've seen, I'm going to leave this screen up for a little bit so you can read, and I'm going to talk about a couple of them. Okay, if you want, you can pause the screen as well if you need extra time to read these. But the everyday use example is a perfect example because it is weird. It is weird in two ways that Dee takes pictures of Maggie and Mama and the house. One is that we know that this is uncharacteristic of Dee because Dee hated the house, according to Mama. So something has changed. But we also know that this is a little strange for a person to just be doing this in general. As we talked about in class, it's kind of weird to take pictures of your own house, even though you never lived there, and take pictures of your family as if your family kind of isn't really your family, but like a distant from you and somebody you observe from the distance. Like you're taking pictures of people in a zoo. This reveals a lot about Dee, both how she changed and in a way how she's kind of stayed the same because she feels different, distant, and above her family. In the wife story, the example that I'm using is something not that's not weird for the character at all, but it's kind of weird for us. And this, remember, was an example of indirect foreshadowing. This detail kind of revealed that they were wolves the whole time. And if we noticed that something weird or uncharacteristic for people in general was going on, we might have caught on that indirect foreshadowing. And the example of ego tripping that I gave is uncharacteristic because it shows some humility, whereas the rest of the poem is just immense hubris or immense overconfidence, and to a degree, almost arrogance. So that changes the theme of the poem a little bit just by having that little moment where it's uncharacteristic of the speaker to suddenly demonstrate some humility. So whenever we see something like that, we should always ask this question and this question specifically. Why would the character act or feel this way? This could either show something about the character themselves or something about the theme. So it shows us other aspects of a character or a setting. And it also encourages conversations about the character motivation, or the situation the character is in specifically. We can learn a lot about Dee by her doing something uncharacteristic. Even wanting the quilts is kind of uncharacteristic, but it's also kind of characteristic of her. It helps us understand what's going on with that character, what her motivation is, and the new situation or the setting. At this point, if you have any questions, take a moment to write them down. We can talk about them in class tomorrow, or you can put them in the chat tomorrow. Okay. Signpost 2, the aha moment. The aha moment, also called the epiphany, is when a character realizes something that shifts her understanding or action. It might or changes her understanding of herself, her understanding of others, or the world around her. Sometimes you notice these by phrases like "suddenly I understood," or "then it hit me," or "it was then I knew." And these are all pretty common, at least in like first-person stories. But don't just rely on these phrases. You will see tons of examples that don't use phrases where the character literally says, "and then I knew." So here's some examples. Take a moment to read. Remember, you can pause it if you'd like. So in the first example, in everyday use, Mama literally says, "and then it hit me on the top of my head and ran down the soles of my feet." Here's a moment where she is literally saying, "I suddenly realized." The second one, she doesn't say it directly in the wife story, but she does have this epiphany where she suddenly realizes that who and what is happening to her own dear love, turning into the hateful one or a human being. And the example in the gift, again, is an epiphany that the speaker seems to have immediately after and also as an adult reflecting on this. So they don't say it directly, but we can see that the speaker, as a child, the character as a child, realizes that they're thinking thing. They realize something when when they have the shard of a splinter in their hand. So the question we should always ask is, how might this change things? How might this change things? And think deeply about what that could mean. It could reveal a change in character, the setting, and or the plot. But it can also reveal the theme of the story. At this moment, write down any questions that you may have about the aha moment in your notebook. And I'll give you tomorrow time in class to either ask that question as a class or write it in the chat. Third and final signpost of this video are tough questions. Also, this could be tough questions or thoughts. And this is a questions a character raises that reveal his, her, or their inner struggles. Again, with the phrases, look for any phrase that expresses serious doubt or confusion, like, "what could I do? How could I understand why she," or "I could not understand why." But remember again that these phrases won't always give you like you can find this in something that isn't just these phrases. Again, they also don't always have to be questions. They don't always have to be questions per se. They can be moments of doubt, moments of confusion that a character experiences. So some examples that I chose from three. One of them has questions, two of them have questions. The other one's not really about the question, it's more about doubt. So everyday use has a direct question that Mama actually asks. This question reveals a lot. She says, "What happened to D?" And this can actually reveal quite a bit about what Mama feels about the name D and what Mama is wondering about her daughter. There's going to be a conflict of culture that Mama is about to experience based on this example. In the wife's story, there's not so much a direct question. The character does question her husband, but they're not big questions. They're not deep questions. She says, "What is those smells on you?" She's asking it directly, but I wouldn't say they're big questions per se. But it does show doubt. It starts to think about how she is starting to doubt her relationship, doubt her love. So even though there's no direct questions, there are deep thoughts. There are tough thoughts that that character has to deal with. And those winter Sundays, you can see how this last question really seems to present the entire theme. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? This basically is a question that the character, or the speaker, I should say, has been reflecting on seemingly his entire life. So, what question should we ask when we see these? What does this question or thought make me wonder about? What are all the places that I could take this specific question that I see? We ask this question because it almost always reveals internal conflict. Internal conflict makes a character seem much more complex, much more round rather than flat. And this is the type of conflict that usually reveals theme. But it can also connect to bigger outside issues that contextualize the conflict. Think of how Mama asking D what happened to her name reveals a conflict of culture between somebody who is experiencing Afrocentrism and Black is Beautiful and the Civil Rights Movement, and somebody who is still living on a farm and is relatively unaware of what's going on outside of her farm and genuinely unconcerned. So these questions can reveal a lot more if we see them as questions. This is the final slide that we're going to go over today. Again, write down any questions you might have about the tough questions. Any examples also, if you can think of where you've seen this in famous movies, TV shows, books you've read in the past. And that could work for all three of these. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this video lecture, and I will see you tomorrow morning. Have a good day.